In the heartland of America, the Miami River acts as a makeshift grave. A severed torso washes up on shore. The gruesome discovery leaves investigators with unanswered questions. In San Diego, California, a killer has left behind pieces of evidence. Detectives must sort through these small clues to prove murder. Some killers go to great lengths to leave little trace of their violence or their victims. But the twisted path that led them to murder is often paved with lies. Sometimes, those closest to us can be the most dangerous. Beneath a layer of trust can lie a hidden obsession. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. In Hamilton, Ohio, residents enjoy a peaceful suburban lifestyle. The inner-city crime of Cincinnati is miles away. But on April 13th, 1998, it didn't seem quite so far. A couple had spotted a human torso washed ashore along the Miami River and called the Butler County Sheriff's Office. Major Anthony Dwyer was the lead investigator on the case. He was also the first to closely examine the remains. Because the body had been in the river, it was badly decomposed and barely recognizable.
When we first discovered the torso, it was up here on the bank, and there was very little we could determine from that. You could tell that it was a white person, but you couldn't even tell if it was a male or a female because of the condition of the body.
The investigators were unable to tell much about the torso. But one thing was clear. This was no accident.
For the extremities being cut off, we took a close look at the bones. It looked like there were saw marks there.
The torso was carefully collected and transported to the morgue for a more thorough examination. Investigators continued to search the area for missing body parts or clues that would help them identify the body. They found nothing. Butler County Chief Coroner, Dr. Richard Burkhart, performed the autopsy. Without a head or even fingerprints to guide him, identifying the body would be difficult. And there was an additional challenge. He first needed to determine the victim's gender.
The unusual thing about the torso was that we weren't immediately able to say whether it was male or female. An examination was made of the lower abdomen or pelvis, and we found the presence of a uterus and ovaries. Obviously now the torso is a female. From there into the injuries on the arms, up in the chest.
But Dr. Burkhart still did not know how she died.
We x-rayed the body to make sure there wasn't any lead from a bullet. And examination of the heart, lungs for conditions that could have caused death, such as stab wounds, none were found.
The only certainty was that her head and limbs had been cleanly severed. The tool markings left on the body looked as if they were made with a household saw. Based on the temperature of the river and the level of the body's decomposition, Burkhart believed the woman had been dead for at least 2 weeks.
When we come to the neck,
at the Butler County Sheriff's Office, Major Dwyer read the autopsy report and began to slowly piece together a case. A woman was dead, but he knew little else. Each year, an average of 50 people are reported missing in Butler County alone.
Our first priority was to try and identify the body. Then the subsequent part is obviously it's a homicide or some kind of abuse of a corpse where they've cut somebody up. It's going to be a long run to even try and identify it.
If Major Dwyer hoped to ever identify the woman, he needed more information. To narrow the search, investigators turned to Dr. Elizabeth Murray, an anthropologist at the College of Mount St. Joseph in Cincinnati. One of only 50 certified forensic anthropologists in the country, she is an expert in analyzing skeletal remains. After boiling the bones to remove the flesh, Dr. Murray examined them to establish the victim's approximate age. Because the chest of the torso was slight in build, she could not rule out the possibility that the victim was a teenager. However, a closer examination of the collarbone, rib cage, and pelvis showed otherwise.
And I came up with a rough age range of probably 25 to 45 years of age at time of death, and I felt that she was probably somewhere right in the middle of that age range.
Dr. Murray next began the difficult process of determining the victim's height.
Normally you would measure a long bone such as one from the legs, but in this case we didn't have those. I had to use some unusual methods. I had to take the clavicle from the torso, measure it, and try to come up with a stature based on that. And that isn't a bone that directly contributes to your stature, so that method was a bit unusual.
Dr. Murray concluded the victim was taller than average, between 5'6" and 6'1". Although the physical description was vague, it gave Major Dwyer a definite lead.
Torso only recovered.
He resumed his search where he had started it, back at the river.
Any and all missing reports.
Major Dwyer searched databases of missing persons reports starting 20 miles upstream.
From the Hamilton area north along the Great Miami River. The river runs to the south, so we figured the body was placed somewhere north of Hamilton.
They got a hit.
Approximate height, 5'8".
14 miles upriver, a woman from Middletown, Ohio, was missing.
Requesting all missing
She
person
fit the
reports.
physical description, both slender and taller than average.
We found several missings from north of Hamilton. We started individually pulling those reports, and we located this one missing that was Cheryl Durkin. So we started focusing on her. She fit the bill as the best possible missing person to match what we had.
At the Middletown Police Department, Major Dwyer met with Detective Frank Hensley. Detective Hensley headed up the missing persons investigation on Cheryl Durkin.
What do you think about that one?
Cheryl's sister, Carla Edwards, reported her missing on March 20th, 3 weeks before the torso was found.
The sister was really concerned at that time because she hadn't checked in with her, and it was out of character for her not to do that. Carla, her sister.
Now they needed to confirm that the torso found in the Miami River was Cheryl Durkin.
2111.
I'll give her a call and go out and talk to her and see what...
Since neither dental records nor fingerprints could be used for identification, investigators turned to DNA for confirmation. In the lab, researchers compared two DNA samples, one from Cheryl's mother and the other from the victim. They matched. Cheryl Durkin was no longer a missing person. She was now the victim of a homicide. In hopes of tracking down her killer, investigators needed to learn as much about Cheryl's life as possible. They began by retracing the last moments of her life.
And we started looking towards suspects. And you generally look to the last to see him, the first to find him, and the closest to him. Those are your key factors in most homicides.
They hoped Cheryl's sister Carla could provide them with the answers they needed. They asked her about her sister's recent activities. Carla said that although her sister had been involved in drugs in the past, she appeared to be putting her life back together.
Just really been trying to get her life clean and make a fresh start.
Cheryl had moved in with Carla. In spite of all the difficulties, the two were very close.
This is for breakfast if you want it.
She told police that just before they discovered her sister's torso, she received a phone call from a man named Scott Rothwell.
Last time we talked, he really was saying some pretty
Rothwell asked her if Cheryl's body had turned up yet. He also made comments about her being cut up in a barrel someplace.
You know everything, and if you think of anything else, give us a call, and I'm sure we'll be in touch. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
This information quickly made him the prime suspect. criminal background check indicated he had been arrested several times and accused of domestic abuse by his former wife.
He lived close to the river. There were some other attributes there that started to make us look very closely at him as a potential suspect. Mr. Rothwell lives in the city of Middletown. He was a close friend to Cheryl. She'd spent some time at his house. She called him quite frequently. Come on in, have a seat.
Major Dwyer brought him to the Butler County Sheriff's office for questioning.
Hey, Scott, I appreciate you coming down.
Rothwell explained he'd heard rumors that a local drug dealer had killed and dismembered a woman fitting his friend Cheryl Durkin's description.
Couple, 3 years.
He didn't know the man's name, but he agreed to help in any way he
I
could.
want to show you something here. When we first targeted Scott Rothwell as a suspect, one of the first things we did is we pulled his phone records. That enabled us to track phone calls that she had made to him and isolate when she was still alive. Then any known call ended at about February 24th of '98, and that helped us narrow down a time frame as to when she probably disappeared.
The last phone call Cheryl made to Rothwell was from a payphone on Garfield Avenue. He explained that Cheryl frequently called him from that payphone. Because she didn't have a car, she relied on friends for rides. Dwyer believed his story.
He was a pretty stand-up guy. He came forward, cooperated. He helped us quite a bit with the phone records. I'll tell you what, Scott, I appreciate you coming in. I know it's been a long day. As the case unfolded, he became less and less of a potential suspect.
The investigators were convinced Scott Rothwell was not a killer. Even with more information, it amounted to nothing more than an unsubstantiated rumor. They were no closer to solving the Cheryl Durkin case than when they began. Her killer, a person capable of extraordinary cruelty, was still out there. In Ohio, a vicious killer had murdered 34-year-old Cheryl Durkin and cut her body to pieces. Her torso had washed up on the shores of the Miami River. The victim's head, as well as her arms and legs, had not been found. Desperate for leads, they tried a new approach. Cheryl's remains were sent to Dr. Stephen Sims at the University of Tennessee Regional Forensic Center. As a tool mark expert, Dr. Sims needed to determine what was used to dismember Cheryl's body. Sims examined the distinctive markings on the ends of the bones.
I can look at striations and determine something about the shape of the blade. In this case, it's a very unique cut in that the striations or the cut marks in the cut surface of the bone are not straight. In fact, they show a fixed radius curvature. I saw numerous false starts, which usually indicates a power saw due to the fact that the blade could not penetrate and it was so it attacks the bones at different angles. The fact that the blade is round and a very high speed, a lot of energy given to the blade, all indicate mechanically powered circular saw.
It would have been difficult to cut through bone and tissue with a circular saw. Dr. Sims believed they were dealing with a brutal killer who would do anything to hide his crime. The doctor's theory provided investigators with new insight into the person they were looking for. News of the homicide outraged the citizens of Middletown.
Okay.
The police department was flooded with tips from anonymous callers. One woman agreed to meet with investigators, but she was too scared to come into the police department.
Okay.
She'd heard rumors that a local thug named James Lawson was responsible for Cheryl Durkin's death,
I have heard rumors.
and that he had hidden her body parts in his sister's garage.
And I mean, I've seen him around.
The sister's
but-
name was Rachel Zimmer.
I mean, I've seen him
The woman
around,
knew
but
both Cheryl and Lawson.
he's missing.
She had seen them together on more than one occasion.
You seen those two together?
Yeah.
Although the story seemed outrageous, police believed the young woman and obtained permission to search Rachel Zimmer's garage. Investigators scoured the scene, looking for clues. Although nothing was found, the search kicked the case wide open.
There was a flurry of activity that started to unfold from there. We were on the same street that Mr. Lawson lived on, and when we were there searching a garage, he started to take some actions by pulling up carpet, painting some walls. He had done several things that started to lend even more suspicion to him. Then we received another phone call from a woman stating that there were stains on this carpet that he was trying to remove. Is this the arrest location?
As investigators waited for a search warrant for the Lawson residence, they ran James Lawson's name through the National Criminal Database.
Right, that's at Central and Garfield.
The suspect had been in trouble before.
Yeah, sure.
His ex-wife had accused him of criminal trespassing.
Of 94?
Yeah, come on in. Sure.
Major Anthony Dwyer and Detective Frank Hensley served James Lawson with a search warrant.
Also, we would like for you to come
Yeah,
down.
grab my shirt first.
Sure.
He agreed to go to the police department for questioning.
He's got that.
Forensic technicians from the Butler County Sheriff's Office collected carpeting from the backyard.
We've got the carpet. All right, let's get out of here.
Inside the house, investigators found bloodstains along the baseboard in a hallway. Samples of the blood were collected for analysis in the lab. In the bedroom, the chemical luminol revealed bloodstains on both the carpet and the baseboards. Samples were taken there as well. Police searched James Lawson's basement, looking for anything that might tie him to the murder. They noticed the work area was freshly painted, using an unusually heavy industrial-grade paint. But the paint wasn't enough to stop investigators from finding an important clue.
Where they used the luminol, it looked like a slaughterhouse when it lit up with the amount of blood that was sprayed by the saw and cutting her up.
Although the circular saw was never found, the amount of blood in the basement convinced investigators that James Lawson had murdered Cheryl Durkin.
I want to talk to you about a homicide we're working. There was a girl, a torso, found.
Major Anthony Dwyer interviewed the suspect at the Middletown Police Department.
I think I did read something about like.
Lawson admitted that he'd heard of the murder, but he said he didn't know Cheryl Durkin.
Can you explain any of that to me? Why there's blood on walls over there?
Well,
He told police he was renovating his house.
hands into the.
He said he injured himself while he was cutting drywall.
Got my hands down.
The blood on the carpet was his own.
Well, yeah, I appreciate
Dwyer
your
believed Lawson was
Got a
lying,
lot of work to do over there. We'll be over there.
but
for a
without
while.
more evidence to tie Lawson directly to the crime, they would have to let him go.
We had a lot of evidence we removed from the house, as well as the painted basement. But we didn't have DNA to connect the victim from being in the house, so we didn't have enough probable cause to charge him at that point.
Over the next few weeks, the blood evidence was analyzed. Samples of blood taken from the house were compared to Cheryl Durkin's DNA profile. It was a positive match. Investigators now had enough evidence to arrest her suspected killer.
You weren't here for James Lawson. Did you enter it with a pickup radius of 1 and make sure the guys in the streets are aware?
But they were too late. With nothing to hold him, James Lawson had already fled. A young woman had been brutally murdered. Her severed head and limbs were still missing. Ohio police were closing in on a suspect. Although they finally had enough evidence to arrest James Lawson,
Where's your phone?
he was nowhere to be found. It was a complicated case. Major Anthony Dwyer needed to find Lawson, but he also needed to find the missing body parts.
As this investigation unfolded and James was on the run, we still didn't have a cause of death. We did not have the head, the arms, or the legs. We just had the torso. That was causing us a great problem for prosecuting the case with no cause of death.
Investigators knew a murder conviction would be difficult to obtain if they did not find the rest of the body.
Find out everything you can about this phone number. and then
They
check
looked
it
at those
against
closest to the suspect for clues that might lead them to the victim's body parts.
Thanks.
One of those people was Rachel Zimmer, James Lawson's sister. Major Dwyer and Detective Frank Hensley had already searched her garage. Now they picked her up for questioning.
We had to get away from all this.
We felt very strongly that she was involved in the case. We felt that she maybe even have buried some of the body parts.
Rachel finally admitted that Lawson had hidden Cheryl Durkin's body parts in a barrel in her garage. Then, when things settled down, she and her mother buried them in another part of the state. Rachel insisted that she hadn't heard from her brother since he disappeared.
Do you think you could find it if we head that way?
Yeah.
Knowing that she helped cover up the crime, she agreed to help them in hopes of a lighter sentence. She led police to the places where she and her mother had buried the body parts.
We parked in a very secluded area and we walked back into the woods. There was a trail. She looked back up at the roadway and could tell about how far she walked when she buried the parts.
Right here. This depressed area right here. Right in here. Yeah.
There, the investigators found a skull buried in a shallow grave.
We did some light digging and were able to uncover the top of Cheryl's face. As we brushed the dirt away, you could see the enamel on her teeth kind of lit up. And then we stopped at that point to bring in the forensic anthropologist, Dr. Murray, to do the complete excavation. Yeah, this is Lieutenant Dwyer. Yeah, go ahead and put an all page out for the detectives. We need some people up here to secure this area.
Backed by a team of anthropologists and police officers, Dr. Elizabeth Murray excavated the rest of Cheryl Durkin's body.
Because of my background in archaeology, I used modified archaeological techniques to excavate the remains. The shallow grave sites contained the head and neck, and also the right leg and both of the feet.
After processing the remains, Dr. Murray examined the skull to determine the cause of death.
There were at least 4 impact sites to the skull. There was some damage to the region of the cheek here that extended across the nose, and that could have been 1, maybe 2 different blows to the face. And there was a sharp margin here at the edge of the nose that looked like the weapon had some kind of an edge to it. Also on the side of the skull, there was an area of damage here that was blunt trauma, where a large piece of bone had been driven into the skull from a lateral aspect inward. And then a small lesion behind the ear here where something had impacted the skull from behind. So obviously the person was battered with some kind of a blunt object.
The lab tests confirmed the suspicions of the investigators. The DNA evidence obtained from the torso, the skull, and the limbs all matched. They all belonged to Cheryl Durkin. Now, police turned up the heat on one of the people who helped Lawson dispose of the body, his mother. 46-year-old Susan Abdow was arrested at her home on September 1st, 1998. Abdow admitted to her role in the cover-up, but claimed she didn't know anything about the murder until after the fact. She told investigators that she was only trying to protect her son.
Well,
According to Abdow, James had left town and had not contacted her. Once again, investigators hit a dead end. Lawson was on the run, and his trail had gone cold. Months passed. And then, Dwyer got a phone call.
Criminal profiling show contacted us and wanted to feature him as a suspect that was on the run. So they came in, they filmed it. A few weeks later it aired.
Again, tips poured in by the hundreds. They received a phone call from an elderly woman in Indiana
Detective section, Hensley.
She claimed her granddaughter was living with a man she believed to be James Lawson.
When's the last time they saw him? Okay, we'll be right there. She actually had a video with Lawson's picture on it. At that time, we went to Indiana. She showed us the videotape there, and we immediately identified a man she knew as David Wallace as James Lawson.
Not today.
She said he had been acting suspiciously since the broadcast. He was extremely uneasy about being photographed or videotaped. An arrest team from the Middletown Police Department, as well as officers from 4 other departments, surrounded Lawson's residence.
Stay forward, hands on top of your head. Hands on top of your head.
What is this?
Lawson was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Cheryl Durkin.
David Wallace.
Let's lawyer first.
During interrogation, Lawson admitted nothing, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Based on the evidence, investigators believed that Cheryl had stayed the night at Lawson's house after he picked her up at the payphone. The couple argued, Lawson lost his temper, and Cheryl paid a tragic price. He then dumped her body in the Miami River, hoping it would disappear forever. On December 13th, 1999, James Lawson was convicted of the murder and dismemberment of Cheryl Durkin. He was sentenced to 21 years to life for murder, evidence tampering, and gross abuse of a corpse. James Lawson believed destroying the identity of his victim would mask his guilt. But a relentless investigation and solid forensic evidence exposed his brutal crime. In Southern California, investigators faced an equally disturbing case. In order to solve the crime, they would have to delve deep into the mind of an obsessed killer. In the summer of 2000, the city of San Diego, California, was the site of a gruesome discovery. On August 14th, a young man searched a dumpster outside a pet shop. He was looking for cans to recycle. Inside a paper bag, he saw something that startled him. It looked like a charred finger. Investigators from the San Diego Police Department were called to the scene. They questioned the man who called in the report. He said he was collecting aluminum cans when he found what he thought were fingers.
Could you stay right here? We're going to go ahead and check it out. But could you stay right here first? Sure. Okay, thanks.
Although they appeared to be human fingertips, detectives needed to be sure.
Call the forensic specialist.
They called in experts to analyze the findings. Tom Washington, a latent fingerprint expert, searched the contents of the dumpster. To avoid contamination, he isolated each piece of potential evidence on white lab paper. He knew immediately they were dealing with something highly unusual.
Well, right off the bat, we could tell they were human fingertips because they had the fingernails on them.
He found 8 fingertips in all. Investigators sifted through the dumpster, careful not to disturb any evidence. Along with the fingertips, they also found a number of other items, including a pair of bolt cutters. On the cutters, they noticed a bar-coded SKU number. Police believed it could lead them to the store where they were purchased.
That's good.
And perhaps the most chilling was a page of handwritten notes that outlined the crime step by step.
There were some papers that had different things written on them, kind of a to-do list. Things like rent a vehicle large enough to extract a body, time off from work, console with the victim's grieving family. Basically a schedule of things that the murderer had planned on doing.
The evidence in the dumpster pointed to a crime that had been carefully planned and then brutally executed. Whoever did this wanted to make sure the identity of the victim remained a mystery. San Diego police were facing a complex case. Sergeant Bill Holmes knew it would not be easy.
Well, initially we didn't have any leads. When you have no idea where your crime scene is or where the rest of the body is, that's a tremendous challenge.
Investigators hoped the crime lab would find more answers. Forensic expert Tom Washington examined the fingertips.
The main challenge was identifying the victim. We had the fingertips, but we didn't know who they belonged to.
But the tips were so badly charred, a readable fingerprint would not be possible. Police knew they would need more information if they ever hoped to find out where these fingertips came from and how they ended up in the dumpster. 8 human fingertips had been found inside a dumpster in San Diego. Who they belonged to and how they got there were anybody's guess. Police looked at items found in the dumpster for clues that might lead them to the killer. At the San Diego Police Crime Lab, the bolt cutters were examined by forensic specialist Sean Montpetit. Investigators suspected they had been used to cut off the missing victim's fingers.
When I looked at the bolt cutters, I noticed what appeared to be small pieces of apparent tissue on the cutting surfaces.
It was determined to be human and saved for DNA analysis. But no fingerprints were found on the item. Investigating further, police hoped the bolt cutters would yield more clues. Using the SKU number, Detective Bill Holmes set out to see who purchased them.
So I sent detectives to some stores in the area. We were able to locate where the bolt cutter was purchased, a hardware store in the area. The bolt cutters were purchased with a credit card, but because of the time of day when we got the information, we couldn't access the computer to find out who that credit card belonged to. We had the number, but we couldn't find out at that time who it belonged to.
Were there any other items that were bubbles by any chance?
The investigators noticed an additional charge on the credit card.
If you rented a machine, you had to get a credit card.
The same person who purchased the bolt cutters also rented a carpet cleaner.
In doing further checking, we learned that that credit card was used to pay for the rental of the rug doctor at the same store. But for the rug doctor, you had to fill out and sign a rental contract.
The name on the rental contract was Calvin Parker. Police now had a solid lead to track down. A background check revealed that Calvin Parker had no criminal history, was a veteran, and certainly did not fit the profile of a brutal killer. Detectives were beginning to think this case would go cold. They got an important break. A few miles north of San Diego, in Carlsbad, California, 2 residents discovered something unusual on their daily walk.
We were walking the trash can, so we walked a little close to it, and it...
Although it was an ordinary trash can, the lid had been secured shut with duct tape.
Stay right back here by the car, and I'm gonna go take a look at it, okay?
The trash can emitted an unusually strong, foul odor. The officer carefully opened the trash can and discovered the body of a woman.
I need a coroner's van to 5000 Christopher Street.
At the San Diego County Medical Examiner's office, Dr. Christopher Swalwell examined the victim, a white female in her early 30s. The level of the body's decomposition put time of death somewhere between 1 and 3 days earlier. She was naked except for a scarf around her neck. Since his office had been notified of the findings in the dumpster, Dr. Swalwell knew what to look for.
The fingers were all missing, so that's when we sort of put 2 and 2 together and worked under the assumption that those two were related.
Dr. Swalwell determined the cause of death to be a large cut on the side of her neck, which severed her jugular vein.
The other significant injury she had was a laceration on the scalp, which actually had an underlying skull fracture, so that was a significant injury.
There was also evidence that the victim had been raped. Dr. Swalwell noted strange bruises around the victim's wrists, on her face, and on her back, indicating the woman had been beaten prior to her death. At the same lab, Dr. Norman Sperber, a tool mark expert, was called in to examine the strange markings on the victim's body. He believed the killer had handcuffed the victim behind her back, and that the cuffs had left the deep marks on both her wrists and on her back.
We took out some handcuffs from property down at the San Diego Police Department. I applied those handcuffs to her wrists and had her body face down on the examining table, and the handcuffs just came right to place where that horizontal mark was, just on the lower back.
The victim was restrained and subdued before she was murdered. Investigators went to look for Calvin Parker. He wasn't home, but police kept his house under surveillance.
We had some of our special investigations detectives go and sit on that residence to see if Calvin showed up.
Female, 20 to 30, red hair.
Although the investigators were making progress, the victim still remained nameless. Investigators searched missing persons reports going back several days, hoping to put a name on the body. They didn't find any remotely matching the victim's description anywhere in San Diego County or surrounding areas. As news of the Grisly homicide hit the streets, people came forward with information. One witness lived in an apartment facing the dumpster. She had seen something unusual the night before the fingers were discovered.
She said that she saw a rental truck back up to the dumpster. A black male exit the truck and throw a couple bags into the dumpster and then leave. The
witness also remembered seeing the man throw something into the bushes.
Her initial impression was that it was a cigarette, but she didn't see any ashes or sparks coming from it.
Investigators returned to the scene and searched the area. They found the tip of the victim's right thumb. The tip was taken to the San Diego Police Crime Lab. Tom Washington performed the examination. The print had enough ridge detail to capture a clear print. But after running it through the database and coming up empty, they still had no one to compare it to. Sergeant Holmes focused detectives on their newest lead, the rental truck spotted by the witness.
With that information, sent a detective to check the rental agency that handles that brand of truck. Agencies, there's several in the San Diego area, and the detective eventually found an agency in the Mission Valley area.
The name on the rental contract was one they had heard before, Calvin Parker. Investigators confiscated the truck and took it to the impound lot. The chemical luminol revealed a circular blood stain. Someone had been bleeding inside the truck, and police believed it was their victim. After a frustrating start with nothing to go on but discarded fingertips, San Diego police now had enough evidence to arrest a suspect in the murder of a young woman. Although they now had a readable fingerprint, she was yet to be identified. Investigators had found a ring of blood in a vehicle rented by Calvin Parker, a man whose name came up early in the investigation. At the San Diego Police Crime Lab, Sean Montpetit compared the tissue on the bolt cutters to the victim's DNA.
DNA analysis of the tissue revealed that it was in fact tissue from the victim.
He then compared the findings with the blood in the truck. Both the blood and the flesh on the bolt cutters matched the victim's DNA. Police now had the direct evidence they needed to obtain a search warrant for Calvin Parker's apartment. Detective Bill Holmes led the team.
We had enough information to believe that Calvin was responsible for this crime and that it probably occurred where he lived. So we obtained a search warrant to search that residence and search his person.
Police cautiously entered the suspect's residence. There was no sign of him, but as they began searching, investigators found clues that made everything fall into place.
When we entered the apartment, we weren't sure who our victim was. We didn't know a name. We were sure that the Carlsbad body belonged to our fingers, but we had no idea who she was until we entered Calvin's apartment. And then we found her pictures and found her identification card.
Her name was Misty Gear, and she was Calvin Parker's roommate. Investigators would spend the next week working 18-hour shifts to recover over 100 pieces of evidence.
Well, we found a variety of notes and documents. In the kitchen, we found some credit card applications using Misty's name. We found some of her checks that had been filled out and made out to Calvin. We found some notes, both at the dumpster and at the apartment, sexual in nature, pointing directly at Misty, that were written by Calvin.
The evidence against Calvin Parker was quickly mounting. Forensic examiners sprayed luminol throughout the apartment to detect any blood. Although the carpet had been recently cleaned, massive bloodstains led from Misty's bedroom into the bathroom. At the San Diego Police Department, Tom Washington compared the victim's right thumbprint obtained from the thumb found in the bushes to the thumbprint on Misty's identification card. The two prints matched. The victim was positively identified as Misty Gear. Investigators hoped those who knew Misty best would lead them straight to Parker.
We have some questions about Mr. Greer. Understood worked here?
They asked her co-workers about the suspect's relationship to Misty.
He and Misty had been roommates for about 3 months, each having their own bedroom and bathroom, strictly platonic, although he did have desires for her. She wanted nothing to do with him in that way.
Police now had a motive. Calvin Parker was obsessed with his roommate. But they still needed to find the missing suspect. The apartment was still under 24-hour surveillance. On the morning of August 15th, Calvin Parker stopped by his apartment to pick up his mail.
There it is. Hey, Calvin. You know why we're here? Yeah. Put your hands behind your head. Stay there. Put your hands behind your head.
He was arrested and taken in for questioning.
We found the girl's fingers in the dumpster.
In the interrogation room, police confronted Calvin Parker with the overwhelming evidence they had compiled against him.
So please tell me what happened.
Parker told Sergeant Holmes his version of events that led to Misty's death.
Calvin said that he was home watching TV in his bedroom when Misty returned from work about 10:30 or so that evening. She went into her bedroom, was watching TV. About half an hour later, he went into her bedroom, sat on her bed, they watched TV for a little bit, and then they had consensual sex.
According to Parker, Misty agreed to be his girlfriend, then changed her mind. They argued, and she insulted him. He said he couldn't take it and just snapped.
He lost his temper, picked up a picture frame that was next to the bed, and struck her 3 times, once in the head, in the throat, and in the chest. She started bleeding profusely.
The extent of her injuries and the handcuff marks on Misty's wrists told a different story.
We did find picture frames next to the bed, none of which were damaged, none of which were strong enough or heavy enough to do the damage we saw on Misty's body.
Investigators believe Calvin Parker was attracted to Misty. When she didn't return his affection, he grew dangerously obsessed and attacked her while she slept. He then dragged her body into the bathroom, where he cut off her fingertips to destroy her identity. On July 17, 2002, Calvin Parker was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Murderers will go to extreme lengths to avoid prosecution, destroying all traces of the crime and their victims. But even the most careful killers cannot anticipate the precision in which forensic science will unearth even the most hidden obsessions. In New Mexico, a university co-ed is missing. Police must piece together a web of evidence to catch those responsible if they ever hope to find her alive. In Virginia, a killer uses the interstate as his personal dumping ground. A woman's body is found, and investigators have little time and few clues to lead them to a killer who could strike again. Perpetrators try to conceal their crimes, yet savvy investigators can take the most obscure data and recreate a murder. Though killers treacherously lure their victims by gaining their confidence, forensic science brings to light crimes committed and the betrayal of a blind trust. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. The town of Las Cruces, New Mexico sits on the Rio Grande, just north of Mexico. A vast desert surrounds the town, the perfect place to conceal a crime.
Emergency operator.
In January 1998, 911 dispatch received a call about a missing student named Carly Martinez. The 18-year-old freshman was beginning her second semester. When campus police arrived at the dorm, her roommate and parents were waiting.
Are you guys here about Carly?
They said it was unlike Carly to be out of touch.
Sergeant Department, Lieutenant Stent. Our daughter's been missing.
Her father told police they hadn't seen Carly since the day before. He and his wife had taken both girls to dinner and then dropped them off at their dorm room about 6:30 p.m.
Welcome. I needed it.
No one had seen or heard from Carly since. University police began a missing persons investigation. Her parents and roommate gave police a description and photograph of Carly. An extremely attractive girl with long dark hair and dark eyes. She was 5'6" and was last seen wearing jeans and a brown jacket. Desperate to find her, they posted flyers around the campus, hoping someone would recognize Carly and contact police. A massive search effort began. Officers and volunteers on horseback combed the surrounding desert area. Police gave dogs a piece of her clothing, hoping the scent would lead them to her. And investigators knew time was running out. If Carly were lost or wandering in the desert, she would not survive for very long. 4 days passed before they got the first break in the case. A fellow student, Samuel Sanchez, saw the missing person posters and contacted police. He said he saw Carly with Jesse Avalos, one of his co-workers at an off-campus bookstore. According to Sanchez, he saw them at a local roller rink on the night she disappeared. Jesse and Carly were skating together and holding hands. Sanchez told police the couple was later joined by Jason Desnoyers, one of Jesse's friends. They looked as if they were having a good time. The Las Cruces Police Department was called in to assist the university in the investigation. David Cortez was the lead detective.
The co-worker said that they closed the roller rink early that evening of the 14th and that he saw the three of them leaving together.
Campus police were the first to speak with Jesse Avalos.
Hello, how you doing?
They hoped he
Jesse
could
Avalos?
provide some answers.
How you doing? I'm Officer Acosta with University Police, and I just wanted to ask you about your whereabouts and if you were hanging out with Carly Martinez the other night. Yeah. Can you tell me what
Avalos
happened?
said he was with Carly on a date and that his friend Jason Desnoyers had joined them.
Up at the dorms. You know, we went out.
After skating, they had a few beers at a local bar.
He just asked to be dropped
He
off.
told police Carly asked to be dropped off at a gas station near campus to use a payphone. He said he hadn't seen Carly since. Detective Cortez found the story odd. He questioned why Carly would use the payphone at the gas station and not at her dorm. The detective now wanted to speak with Jesse's friend, Jason Desnoyers. Maybe he could provide more information.
You're all ready. You're taking, right?
Jason's story started out much like his friend's. He said Jesse Avalos was out on a date with Carly, and he met up with them at the skating rink.
me and Jesse and his girl.
But then Jason's story changed.
Decided to go out and have a couple drinks.
He said they did not drop her off at a gas station. He said they took her back to school.
So we drove her over to her dorm and dropped her off.
And where'd you guys drop her off at?
Detective Cortez grew suspicious. He knew one or both of the boys was lying.
Campus. As far as your story goes, is where because of the conflicting stories, we felt that something wasn't right.
Detective Cortez asked for permission to search Jason Desnoyers' truck, hoping to uncover something that would bring them closer to finding Carly. Police noticed some scratches on the car's exterior, on both the driver's and the passenger's side. They extended the entire length of the car. Other than that, the car appeared to be spotless.
We noticed that the inside of the truck was very clean, as if it had been recently washed.
Several fibers were collected from the floor and seat. Using the chemical luminol, they checked for blood and other bodily fluids. If there were any present, they would glow under the light.
Upon performing the luminol test, we discovered that the center bench seat area was lighting up. This caught our attention, along with the scratches, some indicators to us that something just wasn't right.
When investigators examined the seat more closely, they discovered a large reddish-brown stain. A portion of the seat cushion was cut out and sent to the forensic lab for testing. At the New Mexico State Crime Lab, forensic scientist Mark Salvo tested the truck seat for human blood.
They had removed the foam cushion of the seat, and on there you could see obvious staining on that. Did presumptive examination for the presence of blood on the material side, which was you couldn't see anything, and got positives on that, as well as on the foam where you could see a stain and got a positive indication that there might be blood present on those items.
The seat cushion tested positive for human blood, but the recent cleaning of the seat had destroyed any DNA. As the police gathered evidence, the search for the young girl continued. Carly's disappearance was reported throughout the southwestern states.
On short notice here.
Authorities hoped the media coverage would prompt someone with information to come forward.
That we just received, we got an updated photo on our victim, Carly. Just got that this morning from the family. And as the days followed, we had leads coming in, hundreds of leads. They were distributed to the task force and followed up on.
January 14th.
Investigators spoke to an informant who had recently been arrested on a parole violation. He was a neighbor of Jesse Avalos and claimed to have information regarding a jacket Jesse wore the night Carly disappeared.
Well, you're going to find out why you're here.
The man said that Jason Desnoyers approached him several days after Carly went missing and asked for a favor.
This subject told us that he took the jacket from Jason and hid it under some rolled up carpet just outside the apartment.
Police searched behind the apartment building where the witness said the jacket was located.
There's some carpet right over here.
They found a roll of carpet where he said it would be.
Let me unravel it.
Inside was a military-style jacket.
Yeah.
It appeared to be stained with blood.
More stains on here.
The jacket was bagged and sent to the lab for further examination. After police obtained a warrant, they also searched inside Jesse Avalos' apartment.
Why don't you take the living room?
A team of forensic experts arrived and scoured each room. In the bathroom, investigators noticed reddish-colored stains they believed were blood. The shower curtain was collected for testing. In Jesse's bed, investigators found one long, dark hair. Some of Avalos' clothing was also bagged and sent to the lab. If the smudges found on the jacket and shower curtain were blood, forensic scientists would need to compare it to Carly's. Detective Cortez asked her family for personal items that might provide them with a DNA sample. Investigators were piecing together a case. They knew the longer it took, the hopes of ever finding the girl alive grew slim. They hoped the evidence would be the break they needed to lead them to the missing student. For 5 days, investigators in New Mexico searched for missing college student Carly Martinez. So far, the search yielded nothing. The two men last seen with the young woman claimed they went roller skating, had a few beers, and dropped her off.
We picked her up at the door.
But investigators didn't believe their story. Bloodstains found in the truck and on the shower curtain inside one of the suspect's apartments cast even more doubt.
Come on in here, you guys.
The police secured a warrant to collect DNA samples from Jason Desnoyers and Jesse Avalos.
This is Jason here, just need some body standards.
Desnoyers appeared with his lawyer. A technician took hair, blood, and saliva samples. Detective David Cortez supervised the procedure. He looked for any signs that indicated Desnoyers had been in a struggle.
One of the things I did notice at the time was that he had a large cut on his right hand, which was in the healing process. It was scabbing over, but it was, you can tell that it was very recent.
It's not in the search warrant, no.
Just one
But
photo.
Desnoyers' lawyer refused to let police take photos of the cut.
We don't need a photo.
Body standards were also collected from Jesse Avalos. All of the samples were sent to the state crime lab to be compared to bloodstains found on both the jacket and shower curtain. Forensic scientist Mark Salvo conducted the examinations. First, Salvo extracted DNA from Carly's personal items to compare with samples found on the jacket. Then, he applied a chemical solution to the stains on Desnoyers' jacket.
Looks like there's some discoloration up here in this area. I'm going to do a presumptive test on it. In the presence of blood, I have a colorless solution. It's going to turn into a dark pinkish color if blood is present.
The jacket tested positive for human blood. Salvo also swabbed the shower curtain found in Jesse's apartment. Using the same method, he learned there was blood on both sides of the shower curtain. These were collected and marked for evidence. Salvo then compared the blood found on the jacket and the shower curtain and was startled by the findings. The blood on these items came from 3 separate individuals. He discovered that the DNA matched not only both suspects, but also the victim.
I think it's just unusual in a case like that where you can link 3 individuals to a piece of evidence. So I can show that either all 3 of these individuals were injured and bleeding and left their material on this item, or that some of the individuals carried away DNA and left it on that item.
Police still didn't know if Carly was dead or alive. And they believed the only people who did know were their 2 suspects. Since Jason Desnoyers had cooperated in the beginning, Detective Cortez hoped he would talk now.
When we attempted to contact Jason Desnoyers, I learned through his attorney as well as his family that his whereabouts were unknown. So we moved over to Jesse Avalos.
City Police, Jesse.
Cortez hoped with one suspect on the run, he'd get the other
Jesse, how
to
you
talk.
All right, how are you?
Not wanting to tip his hand, the detective played it cool and just asked Jesse for his help in the case.
Yes.
And we explained to him that we wanted to talk about Carly and if he would help us out, give us any information that he had or that he knew. One of the things we explained to Jesse was how the family was feeling, not knowing the whereabouts of their daughter.
It looked like his tactic was beginning to pay off.
With that, Jesse, out of the blue, told us, well, let's get in the car. Let's go for a ride. The terrain around Las Cruces is so isolated that if a person wanted to hide something out there or someone out there, they could very easily do it.
Jesse Avalos took Detective Cortez to a remote location in the desert. Jesse pointed out a site where Desnoyers had burned incriminating items. What Cortez found in the ashes was chilling. There were remnants of clothing and accessories, metal zippers and rivets, eyeglasses, and a woman's lipstick and compact case. One item was particularly telling.
The main thing that caught our attention was keys which did not burn. They were keys which we knew was Carly's dorm room number.
About 2.5 miles. Advise task force. Like if you can contact me.
Jesse told Detective Cortez that Jason killed Carly and burned her personal items in an attempt to destroy the evidence.
This is his first statement that he really ties Jason as far as getting Carly and killing her.
Jesse tried to retrace Jason's steps on the night Carly was killed, but it was dark and they weren't able to locate the young woman.
Contact me on my cell phone.
But even without a body, Detective Cortez knew they were close to breaking the case.
At least here we have Jesse talking to us, and at least we have a location to work with.
Detectives then had a difficult task. They called Carly's parents in to identify the items found at the burn site. Mr. and Mrs. Martinez confirmed the keys and the earrings were their daughters. And then Detective Cortez got an important call.
Get your hands up now! Now! Get them behind your head!
Hands up! Step towards me!
Behind your head!
Step towards me!
Move away! Keep walking! Lay it down across the rail! Now! Get on the rail!
The early morning hours of March 17th, I get a call that Jason Desnoyers had been located just outside of San Diego, California. The deputy just happened to recognize Jason from one of the flyers of the mugshots. Just by luck that we were able to locate and arrest Jason.
Jason Desnoyers was transported back to Las Cruces and formally booked for the murder of Carly Martinez. Once Jason was in custody, they then arrested Jesse Avalos on tampering with evidence. Investigators knew that without a body, it would be more difficult, but not impossible, to convict them of murder.
It was very important to find this body. Not only to the family, which was a big concern for us, because we still needed to prosecute these subjects.
Police led an extensive search around the burn site. Hundreds of search personnel were on hand to attempt to locate the remains. Given the vastness of the desert, authorities knew the search could take weeks. And through it all, Detective Cortez continued to pit one suspect against the other, convinced it was only a matter of time before one of them broke down.
we decided that we would meet up with Jesse and tell him, hey, we located Jason. He's putting the blame on you now, Jesse. Jesse tells us, well, I'll tell you. I'll come up clean now and tell you where she is. I'll take you straight to her body. We told Jesse, okay, here's your last and final chance.
Started as a grid search, and we'll coordinate with us, the 3 canines, how we want to do it. Keep your radio on where we can communicate with you.
Jesse Avalos again showed detectives several areas where he thought the body was located. Even with the help of university police, border patrol agents, and search dogs, they found nothing. So Detective Cortez came up with one more strategy.
On our way out, we made sure that Jesse did see Jason and that this was no bluff. All right, Jason, you're up. Good luck.
After seeing Jesse Avalos helping police, Jason Desnoyers now began accusing his friend of the murder. He claimed he could show police where Avalos had buried the body. Jason now led detectives to various locations, but Carly's body was not found. Frustrated, officials continued to search on their own. Finally, the rescue team made a gruesome discovery not far from the burn site.
We heard over our police radio that one of our civilian search and rescue horsemen had located what he believed was to be a body.
Cortez and his team of investigators quickly went to the scene. They confirmed that it was the body of a young female. After 67 days of investigation, police had finally found the missing college student.
When we got there, we knew it was Carly. Finally, we found her.
The body was exposed to the harsh desert elements for over 2 months and was badly decomposed. It was removed for autopsy. Police believed the forensic evidence gained at autopsy would not only reveal how she died, but also secure the conviction of her killers. The Las Cruces, New Mexico police had arrested Jason Desnoyers and Jesse Avalos in connection with the disappearance and murder of college freshman Carly Martinez. Over 2 months of investigation came to an end after police discovered Carly's body at a remote desert site. The body was transported to the coroner's office for autopsy. Medical investigator Patricia McFeely's first objective was to make a positive identification of the body. Dental records easily confirmed the victim was Carly Martinez. An initial assessment of the body revealed signs of sexual assault and 27 knife wounds.
Well, we were looking for the cause of death. In her, there were multiple areas of injury. She had stab wounds of the chest, and she had stab wounds of the head, and she had some blunt trauma also in the head area.
Dr. Vince Steffen, a specialist in skeletal biology and forensic anthropology, was asked to examine the wounds. He was asked to determine the type of weapon used.
At the time, the decedent had been out in the desert for a couple months, so she was in an advanced state of decomposition. So looking at the outer wounds on the skin may not necessarily have given a good indication of what actually happened in those areas.
McFeely and Steffen ordered x-rays of the wounds. They discovered a tiny piece of metal embedded in the skull. It proved to be the tip of a knife.
See the perforation?
Then they found evidence that another weapon was used.
Okay.
Okay. Then there was a second pattern of trauma that was consistent with some other type of object. It left a clear impression that it was not made by a knife.
Stephan and McFeely speculated that the other instrument matched the pattern of a set of needle-nosed pliers. Two weapons could mean two attackers, and any one of the wounds could have caused Carly's death.
It would suggest that either two people were doing something or one person had one instrument for some reason, put that one down and picked up another.
Investigators knew the second scenario was unlikely. With this analysis and the other evidence, police reconstructed how the murder took place. That evening, after skating, Desnoyers and Avalos took Carly out into the desert to continue their drinking, and then raped her.
Desert.
We believe that when they got Carly with them in the truck, sitting in between them, they were in control. They figured they could have their way with her, which, consisted of raping her because of what they had done to her at that point, that they couldn't just let her go.
They then killed her and left her body in a remote location, hoping she'd never be found.
Come here.
It was not the ending Detective Cortez had hoped for.
Here we had an 18-year-old college girl just starting her life away from home for the first time. And just saying, how this could happen to anyone's daughter, anyone's child.
Jesse Avalos was convicted of first-degree murder. He received a life sentence. Jason Desnoyers was also convicted and is currently serving a life sentence. Some killers prey on those they know, gaining their trust and making the crimes easier to commit. Others rely on the vulnerability of strangers in need. Virginia's highways offer scenic views of the surrounding countryside. But on the morning of January 23, 1995, along a remote stretch, a grisly discovery was made.
911, where's your emergency?
Shortly before dawn, 911 operators in Washington County received a call about a lifeless body near Interstate 81.
Central 835. Need you to respond to I-81 northbound, just before exit 10.
The responding officer found a half-dressed female lying in the middle of the road. The Washington County Crime Scene Unit processed the area. Crime techs photographed the site and canvassed for evidence.
More blood stains here.
Investigators were unable to identify the victim at the scene. They did not find a purse or any identification. Police also recovered a plastic grocery bag. It had been partially wrapped around the victim's head. More evidence was found close by. A pair of pants believed to be the victim's.
3 pieces of paper.
In the pocket was a slip of paper. On it was written 2 phone numbers, both out of state.
Gainesville on it, 304, I believe is Florida.
The pieces of evidence were bagged and sent to the state crime lab. Investigators also found another important piece of evidence. A set of bloody tire tracks. Detective Kenneth Wilson investigated the case.
There was some obvious tire tread marks that led from the lady's body out toward the northbound ramp of I-81 North and on down the ramp. It became obvious that the vehicle had run over the lady's legs.
Forensic technicians photographed the tracks. It was evident they were made by a very large truck. Detective Ross Sheets also worked the case.
Appeared to be the tracks left on the roadway when he ran over the victim's right leg, left marks that appeared to be that of a tractor and trailer. The diameter and the revolution of the tire led us to believe that, in fact, it was a tractor and trailer.
Pull back, and after a while, it left.
Detectives canvassed the rural area to see if anyone had heard anything unusual. Police found one man who remembered hearing a truck around 3 a.m. He told police he heard the truck idling for several minutes. Then he heard it turn around and drive back onto the interstate. The man was a mechanic who worked on tractor trailers. He did not see the vehicle, but he was confident the engine was a Peterbilt motor. Thinking the trucker might still be in the area, police moved quickly. They advised way stations along the interstate that a possible murder suspect might be traveling northbound in a semi-truck with a Peterbilt motor.
We also notified the Virginia State Police, the West Virginia State Police, the Maryland State Police, and North Carolina State Police to also be on the lookout for any tractor and trailer that may have signs of blood or hair or human tissue on that vehicle.
At the way stations, attendants looked closely at each tractor trailer. The search turned up nothing unusual. The Washington County Coroner's Office conducted the autopsy of the body, officially noted as Jane Doe. The medical examiner determined the victim was between 40 and 50 years old. There were marks on her neck that indicated she was strangled. X-rays revealed the victim's neck was broken. The ME also suspected sexual assault, but no foreign DNA was recovered. The medical examiner concluded that due to the presence of insects and the level of decomposition, the victim had been dead for about 12 hours before she was left on the road. Forensic specialists took fingerprints and palm prints of the victim, hoping to identify her. Both sets of prints were run through several national databases. A match was located in Bloomington, Indiana. The victim was identified as 45-year-old Wanda Jean Turner. Police learned her prints were in the system due to a prior arrest on a trespassing charge. Authorities now needed to locate Wanda's family and notify them of her death. When they spoke to them, they also hoped to gather additional information about her background to aid the investigation.
She was known to hang out at various truck stops and would travel from various parts of the country just by means of riding with truckers.
But her family didn't give detectives much to go on. They had not seen or heard from her in months. With very little to guide them, investigators would have to trace Wanda's movements in the days and hours leading up to her death. They looked to the phone numbers found in her pocket. One of the numbers was a taxi cab company in Gainesville, Florida. Investigators contacted the Gainesville Police Department and asked for assistance. They hoped someone at the cab company would remember Wanda. Gainesville police showed photographs of Wanda to the cab drivers. One man recognized her. The cab driver told police he took her to the bus station around 11 a.m. on January 22nd. He remembered that she only carried a plastic grocery bag. But Wanda did not mention where she was headed.
We lost her trail then and everything went cold, but the last place we could place her alive was in Gainesville, Florida, getting on a bus.
Detective Sheets believed the victim's body was dumped in Virginia about 16 hours later. The investigation, expanded to 5 states, stretched the resources of the Washington County Sheriff's Office.
And we sent detectives out in different directions, going to every truck stop, basically from Roanoke, Virginia to Gainesville, Florida, distributing these posters and requesting any and all information.
They hoped someone had seen Wanda Turner with a truck driver. But no one remembered seeing her. And the case slowly grew cold. Then, less than a month after Wanda Turner's murder, a body of a woman was found off an interstate near Greensboro, North Carolina. The crime scenes were eerily similar. Once again, the victim was partially nude, and her body had been run over by a truck. If the same killer was responsible for both crimes, there could be more to come. Police knew they needed to work quickly before more women turned up dead. As Virginia detectives were piecing together the murder investigation of 45-year-old Wanda Jean Turner, another body was found in North Carolina. The newly discovered victim was found partially nude, abandoned near an interstate. Both crime scenes were similar, and investigators believed they were looking for one killer. The medical examiner determined this victim was strangled like the first. The victim's fingerprints were processed through the national database, and like the first victim, she too had a record for a minor offense. She was positively identified as Cindy Barkley from Georgia. Police tracked down Cindy's family. They said Cindy was living in Florida and didn't keep in constant contact. Although the last time she called, she said she was going to visit relatives in Maryland. That was about 2 months before. When she phoned, she was at a truck stop and said she was doing fine.
I'm gonna just be like, a couple weeks, and then I gotta go. I really, I gotta go.
13.
Since the phone calls home were so infrequent, no one reported her missing, and there were no more leads. Exactly 1 month later, in Kingsport, Tennessee, another woman was found dead off an interstate. She was discovered 30 miles from the first victim. To Detective Sheets, there was no doubt the murders were all related.
Crime scenes were similar. The girl seemed to be positioned on a roadway, and her clothes were pulled down.
The victim's prints were processed. She was identified as Tina Madsen. And like the previous 2 victims, Tina had been strangled. Police from 5 states organized a task force to compare evidence. By working together, they hoped to speed up the search, leading them to a suspect.
We have the address of the...
But so far, they had nothing.
We're going to go just as soon as we...
Although investigators believed the killer drove a truck with a Peterbilt engine, they had no idea who he was or how to find him.
Research the record.
Extremely difficult to identify a suspect in this case. There's a million or so truck drivers in this country and millions of trucks. And just like a long shot to find a suspect.
At the Virginia State Crime Lab in Roanoke, forensic scientists pored over the only physical evidence they had: a receipt, a piece of paper, and a plastic bag. Fingerprint specialist Andrew Johnson examined the evidence, but was unable to develop any prints on the receipt or piece of paper. He then looked at the plastic bag found wrapped around the victim's head.
Actually, a plastic bag is a surface very conducive for latent prints. It's rather slick, it's non-porous, and if the individual that touches it has perspiration or an oily substrate on their hand, will leave a very good latent print.
Johnson placed the bag in a sealed chamber. He then put cyanoacrylate, or superglue, in a small tin and set it inside a chamber to heat and release the vapors. The glue evaporates and adheres to the oily prints, which glow under an alternate light source. After 3 long months and just as many victims, Andrew Johnson made the discovery he believed would turn the case.
After photographing the latent print, I took the photograph and made a 5-time enlargement of the latent print. And then a tracing is done of the minutia on the latent print and transferred to a piece of acetate.
Investigators ran the prints through Virginia's fingerprint identification system. But to their surprise, the database didn't turn up anything.
Missouri, Alabama.
The fingerprints were their only link to the suspect. Police believed they were looking for a trucker, and now they needed to find another way to track him down.
Similar crime scenes have been observed.
Okay, we've developed a media release.
They made copies of the fingerprints taken from the plastic bag and submitted them to jurisdictions across the country.
People who can answer phone calls with this particular evidence we have. A lot of the...
And just when they were losing hope of ever finding the killer, their luck changed. Across the country, in Arkansas, investigators got a hit. A serial killer was on the loose. 3 murders were linked to the same perpetrator who traveled the interstates in search of unsuspecting women. The only clue connected to the crimes was a fingerprint found on a grocery bag. And after months of coming up empty, investigators finally got a match. The suspect had been arrested in Arkansas on a minor charge several years earlier. The print belonged to Sean Goebel of Asheboro, North Carolina. Investigator Sheets of the Washington County, Virginia Sheriff's Office was optimistic that he was their killer.
He was a tractor and trailer truck driver, so we thought we had our man.
Hey, Charlie, listen, I've got some things I got to take care of. I'll get back with
Detective
you later
Kenneth
today.
Wilson went to North Carolina and questioned the suspect's supervisor. Goebel was out on the road and was due back at any time. The supervisor confirmed that Goebel not only drove a tractor trailer, he drove one with a Peterbilt engine. But Goebel's co-workers could not believe he was a cold-blooded killer.
Goebel was known throughout his department as a calm, easygoing, friendly, but somewhat lonely truck driver, but he had a good reputation.
Investigators obtained the trucker's travel logs to see if there was any correlation between the location of the bodies and the suspect's whereabouts.
We determined that he was in the vicinity of a lot of murders that occurred across the country, especially the ones that we were looking at here locally.
When Goebel showed up, detectives were there to meet him.
Police, come here.
He did not seem surprised. There was very little reaction from him. But once we told him he was under arrest and the charge he was being arrested for, he was somewhat surprised.
Goebel denied any involvement in the murders.
Mr. Goebel, as we told you before,
He told police he never met any of the victims.
I think I've seen her before.
While Goebel was detained at the Winston-Salem Police Department, investigators processed his truck. Inside, they found a purse containing the driver's license of the last victim, Tina Madsen. They also collected numerous strands of hair. And they found what appeared to be blood. When detectives confronted Goebel with the evidence found in his truck and on the plastic bag, he admitted he had picked up the women, but claimed they were alive when he dropped them off. Police then obtained a search warrant for his home. Inside his bedroom closet, they made a gruesome discovery. Police found purses, women's shoes and underwear, and other personal items. Investigators believed Goebel was collecting souvenirs from each victim. With evidence mounting against him, Sean Goebel ultimately confessed to the 3 murders.
There was a plastic bag. He looked at us for just a moment or two, and he conceded that it was him. His reaction from then on out was somewhat subtle. He was very cooperative. His response was really, "I'm glad this is over, but I'd like to just get it behind me and get back out on the road."
But Detective Wilson knew he wasn't going anywhere.
Okay, Mr. Goebel.
Goebel told police what happened the night he picked up Wanda Turner. Near Virginia, Wanda asked the trucker for a ride.
Want a party?
He said he agreed and killed her. Then he put the plastic bag over her head to keep the blood from getting on the seats. The confession gave investigators more than they needed to bring the killer to justice.
We started the crime scene with 3 pieces of paper and 2 telephone numbers in a plastic bag. Like a million in one shot trying to locate this individual.
His confessions allowed Goebel to avoid the death penalty. He received 3 consecutive life sentences. Killers can lure unwitting victims, blindly gaining their confidence and trust in order to commit murder. Yet forensics can reconstruct the details of their crimes and piece together the evidence needed to convict, exposing the perpetrator's lies and bringing them to justice. In Northern California, a car crashes down an embankment in the dead of night. Rescue workers scramble to save a couple trapped inside. But the routine investigation takes an unexpected twist when details about the victims are revealed. Not far away, in Palo Alto, a woman is found dead at the bottom of the basement stairs. As detectives look into the accident, they begin to question the sequence of events. Sometimes, first impressions mask the truth. A tragic accident, a happy marriage, a solid alibi. In the face of murder, all these come under scrutiny. To solve the demanding cases, investigators must sift through the debris of shattered vows. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. El Dorado County, California, the Golden Country, where traffic is light and barely lit roads are the norm. On October 27, 1992, One of those roads offered up a deadly turn. Around 8 p.m., a man driving alone noticed swerving headlights in his rearview mirror and heard a crash. When he looked back, the car was gone. Fearing that someone was seriously injured, he turned around and pulled off to the side of the road. He saw the vehicle at the bottom of the embankment. He ran down to help. The woman sat motionless. Her companion sat dazed and in pain.
Fire emergency.
A car went over the embankment.
Are there people injured?
Yeah, there's 2 people inside, and I think the driver's dead. The other guy's hurt real bad.
Units from the Folsom Fire Department raced to the scene. Officers from the California Highway Patrol and other emergency personnel moved quickly to rescue the victims. Rescue workers carrying equipment helped each other down the steep embankment. Paramedics confirmed the woman was dead. The passenger identified himself as Mitch McLeese. He said he couldn't move his legs. Paramedics suspected internal injuries. When asked about the accident, he said he couldn't remember much. He told them he was a friend of the woman who was driving. Her driver's license identified her as Susan Moyer, a 52-year-old woman from El Dorado. McLeese said he must have fallen asleep. When he woke up, they were in the ditch. Paramedics rushed the passenger to Sacramento Medical Center for treatment. A deputy from the El Dorado Sheriff's Department arrived at Susan Moyer's home around 11 p.m. He told Ken Moyer his wife had been killed in a car accident. The officer asked questions, gathering information about Ken's wife, Susan, and her passenger, Mitch McLeese. Moyer said McLeese was one of his employees. He also told him that McLeese helped them move to California from Sarasota, Florida.
Today, so I can just start in the kitchen tomorrow.
Ken and Susan were newlyweds, and McLeese stayed on to do some work in their new home. That evening, Moyer had to leave for an appointment around 7:15 and couldn't take McLeese back to his hotel.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Susan offered to drive him when he was done.
Hey, Mitch.
Gentleman that was with
Moyer said when he returned home around 8:30, Susan still wasn't home, and he began to worry. He drove around searching for her. Moyer told the deputy he blamed himself for the accident. He said if he'd taken McLeese home, Susan would still be alive.
No, I left.
The next day, an autopsy was performed. X-rays revealed the victim's 4th and 5th cervical vertebrae had been fractured and dislocated. Susan Moyer had broken her neck. The victim's eyes were black and swollen, indicating Susan's head hit the steering wheel on impact. According to police reports, the car had rolled down the steep embankment. The coroner determined her injuries were consistent with the accounts. The death was ruled accidental. Susan's body was released to her husband. She was cremated and her remains sent to her hometown of Sarasota, Florida, for burial. Police are required to investigate all traffic fatalities and went to the hospital to follow up on passenger Mitch McLeese.
Do you mind if I actually take a look at that?
But the nurse informed the officer that McLeese wouldn't let the doctors perform any tests and had checked himself out hours earlier.
A few hours ago, he left a couple friends.
Against doctor's orders. At the El Dorado Sheriff's Office, Lieutenant Jim Roloff had questions. The only witness to the accident had left town, and it seemed suspicious.
Our seriously injured victim, who was supposedly in the hospital dying, has checked out and gone home to Washington, the state of Washington. So, you know, at that point, things started not looking too good.
Lieutenant Roloff reviewed the autopsy report for anything out of the ordinary. He found nothing. But all that was about to change.
Lieutenant Roloff.
Hi, this is Detective Beecham from the Sarasota.
In Sarasota, Florida, a detective from the Special Investigations Unit relayed information to Lieutenant Roloff from Susan Moyer's family. She said they didn't believe her death was an accident. Florida investigators told Roloff they conducted a preliminary background check into the Moyers.
Going to do a reconstruction on this.
They discovered Susan was recently awarded a $3.7 million settlement when her first husband was killed in a small plane crash. According to family members, Ken Moyer came into her life shortly after she received the money. This information raised suspicions.
Yeah.
Roloff and his team decided to re-examine the accident.
The first thing that had to be established is, how did this woman die? And was it, in fact, as a result of injuries suffered in the accident, or was it from some other means?
California Highway Patrol's major accident investigation team, known as MATE, was called in to help find an answer. At the scene, the investigators reconstructed the accident.
Okay, next one.
They measured the slope of the embankment and the length of the tire tracks to learn exactly how the car ended up in the ditch. Paul Whiting headed the investigation.
We get an approximate speed of the vehicle, the amount of time that it took for it to come to a stop. From that, we can calculate the forces, the approximate forces that the vehicle experienced as it dissipated its energy coming to a stop.
Broken branches would also help gauge the force of the car's descent. The greater the damage, the harder and faster the car tumbled. Though the trees showed scars of the accident, Whiting and his team found that the damage was minimal.
We determined there simply wasn't enough force generated to the vehicle and thus to the occupants of the vehicle to produce the deadly injuries that she received.
The investigation team now needed to closely examine the car, which had been towed to the impound lot the night of the accident. Paul Whiting was puzzled. He found the car's condition particularly unusual.
We could find no significant damage to the interior of the car. We checked the steering wheel. It wasn't bent in any direction. There was no marks in the dashboard. The pedals were all intact. There was nothing on the interior of the car that would have suggested a significant human impact with any of those structures.
Investigators checked for blood or fibers to determine if Susan Moyer or her passenger had hit the windshield. No evidence was found in the glass. Whiting concluded the glass shattered from the stress of the collision and not because one of the passengers hit their heads on the windshield. The The exterior of the car also showed little serious impact.
The damage to the left front is the only damage that is significant at all. At the most, it would represent a speed change of 10 miles an hour. Now, the forces in a 10-mile-an-hour speed change would be comparable to backing into a light post from a parked position. So it's not the kind of forces that we would expect to see fractured necks or death-producing injuries from.
Whiting and his team found no evidence the car had rolled over or that it was involved in a serious accident. Lieutenant Roloff read the mate report and grew more skeptical.
I got a favor. As you start down this road, everything you're developing says that this accident is not what it appears to be.
Authorities now believed Susan Moyer's death was not an accident. But proving it would not be easy. Susan's body had been cremated and all physical evidence of her death destroyed. In El Dorado, California, Susan Moyer was found dead at the scene of a car crash. After reconstructing the accident, investigators now believed she was murdered. And they discovered there was a possible motive. Police grew suspicious after they learned the victim's new husband stood to inherit almost $4 million upon her death. Detective Sergeant Hal Lamb of the Homicide Division discussed the mate findings with Lieutenant Jim Roloff.
They were telling us that the forces involved in this accident weren't sufficient to cause the broken neck.
Because Susan Moyers had been cremated, Detective Sergeant Lamb had to rely on the original autopsy report and details observed at the scene.
Fortunately, the night of the accident, we had a sheriff's coroner investigator that had gone out and took a series of photographs of Susan inside of the vehicle, and so we had those to work with.
The photographs revealed the position of the body, blood patterns on the victim's face, and bruising around the eyes. Armed with this new information, investigators turned to the Sacramento Forensic Services Department and Chief Medical Examiner Gregory Schmunk. He reviewed the reports, photographs, and eyewitness accounts of emergency personnel at the scene.
The description that there was bruising around both of the eyes within seconds to minutes after the accident, as described by the paramedic on the scene, would be very unusual. It takes some time for that bruising to occur because the blood has to seep through those soft tissues. That indicated to me that the death had occurred prior to her driving off of the road.
The photographs also showed dried blood patterns on the victim's face. These blood stains ran down the side of the victim's face toward her ear. But the effects of gravity after the accident should have made the blood drip down the front of her face.
The blood pattern on the body was not consistent with the way she was positioned in the vehicle.
Schmunk closely examined the autopsy report in light of the California Highway Patrol's analysis of the accident.
There was a fracture of the mid-neck that was inconsistent with any type of fracture that I'd ever seen in a motor vehicle accident, such as the type that Susan was in. There was no rollover, there was no significant impact. So the location of the fracture was unusual for that type of incident. I'd concluded that the fracture of the neck and therefore the cause of Susan Moyer's death was not due to a motor vehicle accident.
Now they needed to find out exactly how this woman died and who wanted her dead.
Where does it go, I think?
They turned to her husband, Ken Moyer, and the only survivor of the crash, Mitch McLeese. But McLeese had abruptly left town after the accident. And Ken Moyer had returned to his home in Florida, where he owned a sporting goods store. Police spoke to those closest to the couple. They were hoping to find out more about their relationship. Close friend Kyle Dallinger lived nearby.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Kyle told police Ken Moyer was distraught the day after the accident.
Sir, what are you doing?
Moyer asked him if he would drive him to the hospital to pick up his friend Mitch McLeese, who was checking out. The neighbors said he saw Ken Moyer hand McLeese a plane ticket.
Yeah, I overheard a phone
He was
call.
told Mitch McLeese was not going home, but relocated to a small town outside of Seattle.
Did he make any comments to you about this?
Given this new information, the police were beginning to uncover a murderous plot.
Leave town, take a vacation.
We really felt that Ken Moyer was the brains behind this whole thing. We thought that it was a homicide for money at that point, and we felt that Mitch McLeese was just a hired hand.
Detectives went to Washington to interview McLeese. When detectives identified themselves, he was shaken.
Yeah, actually we're detectives from El Dorado County Sheriff's Department. I'm Detective Hal Lamb, this is Detective Bill Wilton. We're here to talk to you about the accidents you were involved in with Susan Moyer.
McLeese stuck to the story that Susan was driving and he had fallen asleep. He said he woke up just as the car plunged down the embankment and didn't know what caused the accident.
Yeah?
Because of everything they had uncovered, detectives knew they weren't getting the whole story.
And obviously Susan can't tell us what happened. He was lying. There's no question that he was lying. But we didn't really have enough physical evidence to arrest him at that time.
They needed more. So Lieutenant Roloff sent detectives to Sarasota, the Moyers' hometown, to talk to the people who knew them best.
I made a list of some individuals that I feel warrant some further questioning.
They met the local investigators who had been gathering information about the Moyers and their employee, Mitch McLeese. The detectives learned about an affair Ken Moyer was having with a woman by the name of Betty Ann Brown. Detectives interviewed Brown, who admitted she'd been seeing Ken for the last 2 years.
I know he was very upset.
She was shocked when she heard he was getting married.
And I'm being interfered.
But he assured her that his marriage would not interfere with their relationship.
This card's okay?
Absolutely.
And Ken Moyer kept seeing Betty Ann on a regular basis.
Don't you want that? Yeah. Once, I believe.
She admitted that they'd had an intimate encounter just before the wedding. The day of the funeral, they had an intimate encounter after the funeral, and she even gave us the location and the time of the motel that she met with him.
Detectives began interviewing employees at Ken's sporting goods store. And it seemed as if everyone had a similar story to tell. According to everyone who knew him, Ken's marriage to Susan was not about love.
We learned from all the people that we had interviewed that it was apparent that Ken Moyer had married Susan for her money, and that Ken really didn't care for Susan.
I asked him.
He had told one of his employees, it was a question-answer thing, Eddie, do you know why someone gets married? And Eddie says, for love, and Ken says, no, it's for money.
Police now had a clear motive, but the crime and the crime scene still remained unclear. They now believed the accident was staged to cover up Susan's murder. But linking Ken Moyer and Mitch McLeese to the killing would take more than motive. It would take proof in the form of forensic evidence. California detectives began investigating an accident, but ended up uncovering a murder. They believed Ken Moyer had paid one of his employees to kill his wife, Susan. Although the circumstantial evidence was compelling, they had no physical proof. Investigators Lamb and Roloff now believed they knew how Susan had died, but they still had no direct evidence to prove that Moyer or McLeese had killed her.
Go over, take a look at it, and see where we want to go from there.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
4 months after the crash, a newspaper article prompted a local handyman to contact police. The worker told detectives Ken Moyer had hired him to regrout some tiles in his foyer.
First layer, it wouldn't be a problem, and just relay everything, but he wanted the grout and everything taken out, completely redone.
Okay, Chuck, here's the spots I want you
Moyer
to look
explained that he'd spilled cherry cough medicine, and it had penetrated the grout. The worker told Moyer that he didn't need to replace the grout, just scrape and regrout the stained portions.
all the way to the cement. All this grout out, this whole section here.
Just because I was concerned about it. So
And Mr. Moyer insisted that he remove all the grout and replace it all. And he told us that as he was removing that grout, that Mr. Moyer was sitting there with a vacuum, vacuuming up the stained grout.
He described precisely where the tiles were located. Since the tiles were porous, he felt confident that some of the red stains still remained.
This is the area by the door that we're really concerned with. The tile guy. This is the area that he came in and pointed out to us. Some area right in here.
Police obtained a warrant to search the Moyers' house. Faye Ann Springer, a criminalist for Sacramento County, examined the tiles for bloodstains. A preliminary examination revealed no outward signs of blood.
Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll spray in this area first and then work our way down towards the door.
Working systematically, Springer sprayed the area with a chemical called fluorescein, which glows in the presence of minute quantities of blood.
Oh, we're getting a little weak reaction in a couple of places here. It doesn't identify blood, it only gives you areas of interest. And there were at least 2 areas of interest in the entryway. What we did then is request that those tiles be actually physically removed because the amount of blood was not visible to the eye, so we wanted to look at the sides of the tile to see if blood may have seeped between the actual ceramic tiles and in through the grout.
The tiles were brought to the lab and did in fact test positive for blood. Springer then had to determine whether or not it was Susan Moyer's. And she wasn't sure this could be done.
The amount of material was marginal for testing. It's very difficult to test bloodstains that are in grout or cement, but I thought there might be enough present on the tiles that they could get enough material, DNA material, out of it.
Springer was right. The sample did contain enough DNA for testing. A comparison to the victim's DNA proved the blood on the tiles was Susan Moyer's. On March 27, 1993, Ken Moyer was arrested in Sarasota, Florida, and returned to California. Investigators pieced together the events that led to Susan's murder. Ken Moyer had courted and married her for money. After the wedding, he moved her to California, far away from loved ones who would ask too many questions. Moyer then enlisted Mitch McLeese and gave him money to help him carry out the murder. On the night of October 27, 1992, McLeese crept up behind the unsuspecting victim and broke her neck. The force of the break caused her nose to bleed and blood to spatter on the floor. Her death was instant. Detectives believe Ken Moyer helped McLeese put his wife's body into the car.
And I think that Mitch McLeese sat in the passenger seat and reached over and steered the vehicle and probably operated the gas with his left foot.
Ken Moyer was convicted of the first-degree murder of Susan Moyer. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Mitch McLeese was also convicted of first-degree murder and received an identical sentence. Some killers will go to great lengths to hide their true nature and conceal their crimes. But in Palo Alto, California, it is the secret itself that unmasks a killer. Palo Alto is an affluent bedroom community of San Francisco in the heart of Silicon Valley. This quiet area can offer a sense of security and a refuge away from urban life. But sometimes danger is closer than it looks.
911 emergency.
On May 5th, 2000, police dispatch received a 911 call. A woman had fallen down the stairs and was not breathing. The dispatcher alerted the Palo Alto police and the rescue squad, who raced to the scene. Moments later, police arrived at the residence of Mary Ann and William Slater. Despite all the rescue efforts, it was too late.
That's all we got.
Mary Ann Slater could not be resuscitated.
251 dispatch. Go ahead and dispatch me a coroner and a detective at this location.
2 classes today. There's one at 10:20.
Detective Mike Denson spoke with the victim's husband.
And so
William Slater told the investigator that nothing unusual happened that day.
I thought she might still be.
He said after their morning jog, Mary Ann left around 10 o'clock to teach a piano class. And he left the house an hour later to survey a new building site.
Okay. Have a good day.
He stayed at the site until 1 p.m.
For work,
When he left to meet some friends for lunch, William said he received a call from his wife's work.
I came back to the house. Hello?
She had not shown up for her second
Oh,
class.
that's strange. She was at home when I left. Did you try her cell phone?
He grew concerned and called home several times, but there was no answer.
Told me that she hadn't
William
shown
also
up
told
for her-
Detective Denson
for
it
her
was not
second
unusual for
Everything
Mary Ann
was
to go
okay.
home
We
in
came
between
in the
classes.
house, but there she was at the bottom of the stairs.
When he returned home,
I
he
ran
discovered
down.
the tragic accident.
Music teacher.
He said that he looked down the stairs and she was laying on the stairs and was not responsive. He told me that he believed that she had fallen down the stairs, and he noticed that she was wearing these particular shoes, and he knew that she had fallen in those shoes previously. And so he speculated that she was carrying something down the stairs, tripped on the shoes and fell down the stairs.
By all accounts, it looked like a terrible accident.
She'd fallen down the stairs, pronounced her dead.
Mary Ann, home alone, had tripped, hit her head, and died.
Blood on the bell up there, on the steps, and other places. So, and she is not.
An initial assessment of the scene indicated that the victim appeared to have been doing laundry when she fell. Like all unattended deaths, Mary Ann Slater's body was sent to the coroner's lab for autopsy. Assistant Medical Examiner Coroner Diane Vertis performed the examination and quickly became suspicious.
See this? See the neck?
Well, initially we looked for injuries consistent with the story that she fell down a flight of stairs. What we found was much different than what we were led to believe.
The external examination revealed 7 separate wounds to all different parts of the head.
What's very important about this is that These lacerations were not consistent with a single event. They were much more consistent with multiple blows to the head.
And you can feel the crest skull fracture.
What about the neck?
We also did find some injuries on the hands, and the injuries on the hands were more consistent with what we call defensive wounds. Okay, we got a 1/4-inch laceration there.
The evidence suggested Mary Ann Slater was beaten to death while trying to fend off her attacker. An internal examination revealed additional injuries to Mary Ann's neck.
There were signs of strangulation. This, of course, was completely contrary to a simple fall down the stairs. This is something that we saw some signs of externally and became more evident on the internal exam.
Dr. Vertis called in Dr. Gregory Schmunk, the chief medical examiner coroner for Santa Clara County.
I first became involved with the investigation on a Friday evening when I got a phone call from one of my investigators that a woman had fallen downstairs. I told her to proceed as usual with her investigation. And the next thing that I heard about the case was when I heard the autopsy findings, that those autopsy findings were not consistent with a fall down the stairs.
After reviewing the crime scene photographs, Dr. Schmunk agreed with Dr. Vertis' findings that Mary Ann's injuries did not occur from falling.
That examination made me conclude that the majority of the blows to the back of the head were not with a striking object, but were more likely the head being impacted against a straight surface or possibly a right-angled surface.
Mary Ann Slater's death was no accident. This was murder. In Palo Alto, Mary Ann Slater was found dead in her house from what appeared to be an accidental fall. But an autopsy revealed injuries inconsistent with this initial assessment. It now looked as though Mary Ann was beaten and strangled. Detective Mike Denson of the Palo Alto Police Department believed a recent rash of burglaries in the neighborhood might provide a possible scenario.
Over the last 6 months, there had been several residential burglaries in the Southgate neighborhood. That was a consideration of mine as I began this investigation.
He checked previous reports of burglaries. Denson theorized the burglar might have been surprised by Mary Ann and killed her.
That's what I came up with also.
To test the theory, investigators secured a search warrant and returned to the house. They checked the exterior perimeter, looking for signs of a break-in. There were no signs of forced entry. Inside the house, forensic examiners needed to pinpoint the exact location of her death. They started with the basement steps. Forensic technicians used the chemical luminol to locate the presence of blood. If Mary Ann had actually fallen and hit her head, there would be a definite pattern of blood. There wasn't any spatter on the stairs at all. From the basement, they backtracked and examined other parts of the house.
Sarge, I didn't see any blood spatter.
Since the basement door opened into the kitchen, they began there.
We found some blood spatter and some dilute blood stain in the kitchen of the house. I knew at that time that we were going to have to do luminol to bring up a cleaned up crime scene, and so that was our next course of action, was to bring the luminol experts in to spray for luminol and detect blood stain.
If a room hid a bloody secret, luminol would find it. And in this case, it did exactly that. Someone had tried to cover up a violent act. Chief Medical Examiner Gregory Schmunk.
The luminol test revealed that there was extensive blood throughout the house, especially that kitchen and an adjacent bathroom. It looked like there had been a primary crime scene in the kitchen where she had been assaulted, and then the assailant had later gone to the bathroom and probably washed up.
There was a huge amount of blood discovered, and no amount of cleaning could hide it. The kitchen floor glowed with the telltale signs of murder. Upon closer examination of the glow patterns, a partial left shoe print emerged. Mary Ann Slater had been killed in the kitchen, and her body moved to the bottom of the stairs afterward. A burglar would have no reason to clean up a crime scene and stage a murder to look like an accident. Mary Ann probably knew her killer. As a matter of routine, police needed to rule out Mary Ann's husband, William, as a suspect. They first checked his alibi, starting with his phone calls.
Do a photo, so I'd like you to photograph each of the calls that were received in this box, collect it, and then collect this address book for me as well.
Got it.
Thank you.
Hoping for anything that might lead to a break in the case, investigators collected the caller ID box from the Slaters' telephone, along with Mary Ann's address book. At the state crime lab, a DNA profile was made from the blood found in the Slaters' kitchen. The profile was then compared to DNA extracted from Mary Ann's body during autopsy. To no one's surprise, they matched. Police canvassed the Slaters' neighborhood to see if anyone had witnessed anything suspicious on the day of the murder. One neighbor told Sergeant Denson that a silver truck blocked the alleyway behind the Slater house around 12:30 that day.
It was about noon.
She paid particular attention to that vehicle because it was wide enough and the street was narrow enough that it made it uneasy for her to get around it. So she noticed it and made a mental note of it at that time.
She couldn't go anywhere for half an hour. Police knew William Slater drove a silver truck.
In the house all day?
This would indicate that William was actually in the neighborhood at the time of the murder, not at the work site as he had told detectives earlier. An officer searched the construction area for any evidence or anyone who could corroborate William's story. He found nothing. Across the street, the officer noticed a driving range that had a fairly good view of the vacant lot. He questioned the clerk at the golf club to see if she had seen anyone over there on the day in question. The clerk said that she knew William, and although she was working that afternoon, she hadn't seen him or anyone else there. Detective Denson looked closer at the rest of William's story. The Slaters' caller ID registered a call from Mary Ann's work and several calls from William's cell phone. Denson tracked the location of the calls.
When you turn a cell phone on or hit send to make a call, the cell phone will search for the strongest signal or the closest cell site to put the call through. Since he was telling me he was on 101 at Woodside Road, he theoretically should have been hitting a cell site close to that location. In fact, he was hitting a cell site that was close to his house.
It looked as if police could not eliminate William Slater as a murder suspect. His alibi was falling apart. Police believed the man who just a few days ago seemed like the grieving widower
Just as we were looking around,
was actually a killer.
on the bell up there, on the steps.
But to prove it, investigators knew they needed to physically link him to the accident. Palo Alto investigators believed William Slater had staged an accident to cover up the murder of his wife. Now they had to prove it. The autopsy revealed that Marianne had been beaten and strangled, and William's alibi had fallen apart. But he didn't appear to have a motive. By all accounts, the Slaters were happy. They recently celebrated their 25th anniversary and had 2 children together. To learn more, Detective Denson called Marianne's friends and family.
My intention was to call all the friends that I could discover in the address book and see if I could find potential motive. And I was just calling up and asking them if they could think of anything that would help with the investigation. And ultimately found a friend that was aware of an affair that occurred some 20 years ago.
Edward Dale had been a friend of Marianne's for most of her life.
Hi, how you doing, sir? This is Sergeant Mike Denson with Palo Alto Police Department.
Denson interviewed Dale about his relationship with Marianne and William.
About 15 years.
He told the detective he had an affair with Marianne. During the time of the affair, Marianne became pregnant with Dale's son. William Slater raised the boy as his own, never suspecting he was not the father of the child. The last time Dale saw Marianne, she told him she planned to reveal their secret to her son on his graduation day.
You to know that.
Dale said he was relieved. The secret had gone on too long. The family secret provided police with a possible motive. And Detective Denson did a little more digging.
I did a thorough investigation using the FBI Financial Analyst Unit in Virginia, and I had them do the full financial records check.
He learned the Slaters had money problems and their finances were dwindling away.
He was doing his own business, but it was not bringing in very much income, so we basically found them to be broke.
Denson learned through friends that Marianne was not aware of their financial problems. William Slater seemed to have many secrets, but investigators still had no physical evidence linking him to murder. Police obtained a search warrant to examine the vehicle he had been driving the day his wife was killed. The truck was impounded, and forensic technicians scoured the interior for evidence. Stashed underneath the front seat was a T-shirt. A stain that appeared to be blood was discovered. The shirt was bagged and marked as evidence. A search of the back seat revealed a pair of athletic shoes. The technician noticed several red smudges on them. The items were sent to the state crime lab for analysis. Samples from the stains on both the shoes and the shirt tested positive for human blood. To determine whose blood it was, DNA was extracted from the samples, following careful procedure to avoid contamination of the evidence. A computer-aided comparison was made between the samples and the DNA of the victim, Marianne Slater. They matched. But a small amount of blood might not hold up in court and could possibly be explained away. A print expert examined the left shoe found in William's truck to see if it matched the tread pattern found on the print in Slater's kitchen. After the shoe was inked, a sample print was carefully made and a transparency was created. A comparison revealed both prints had identical tread and matching wear patterns. The prints were made by the shoes in the truck. It was the brake police needed. On May 19, 2000, 2 weeks after the murder of his wife, police arrested William Slater. Although he initially denied any involvement, after several hours of questioning, William confessed to killing his wife. He flew into a rage after his wife revealed her infidelity. At first, he tried to strangle her, but when she fought back, he kicked her to death. He then placed her body at the foot of the basement stairs to stage the accident. And returned to clean up the blood in the kitchen.
His life was shaken to the max, and I believe that he killed her as a result of that. In addition, they were financially unstable at this point, and his whole life was about to change or changing.
William Slater was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Killers who are closest to their victims often believe they can cover up their crimes and fool investigators. But more often, forensic evidence is discovered, unmasking the deceit and bringing the perpetrators to justice.